So this topic, um, uh, nesting labyrinths of meaning, could be put in many ways, but that's a good one. Starts off the travel towards that. Starts off from uh, me mucking about in different structures in small French games and kind of actually looking at a couple of games at once, but this route is an easier walk-in, so we'll use this. So this is a page from a book called Perilous Wilds, which is, let's say, a wilderness generator supplement for a game called Dungeon World, which is based on the Apocalypse World engine, and it's produced by Lamplight and Brimstone. I can't offhand remember the writers. I should check them and mention them, because the particular writer that has done this book has done a couple of, I think he's Chasing Souls, but I have to check, has done a couple of interesting things. But there there is a kind of interesting seemingly simple approach, but the approach actually hides a lot of, it opens up to quite a bit of possibilities. But that's where we start the troubles. So I should also say that this is not the invention here. Like, if one wants to be super nerdy about it, this was kind of in the gaming culture around this time, which is somewhere in the 2010s, that this sort of formation or approach to a tag concept, which is not quite the normal tag, started forming. But this was a particularly rich take on it and was influential because of this. And this book is known partially, it's kind of like showing some return, even though the particular game is not so present. Okay, enough background historical nerdery, which is useful, but I think covers enough of that. So tags. Now, tags appear in this book in multiple forms. This might be actually the first place, but I'll show it here first. Perilous Wilds. I can share it later, even in the group, in the Telegram group. Yes, that's the right spelling. Nicely put. Okay, so so now you're making so many comments that I have to. All right. Okay. So we can start from this sort of simple takes. Now you're just being. All right. Okay. So so here these are tags for a place, but I'll start with what's the idea in the background, which is kind of what's it kind of like represented by this page. So the idea is like how you can make quickly places, generate them, right? And it comes from this idea of a tag that that you might actually, to quickly generate, let's say, basic elements, really basic seeds kind of for a place. You can utilize this sort of tags that set, like, okay, you ask yourself what's the climate, and then you can apply a frigid tag, temperate tag, or torrid tag, but potentially others. These are not like any kind of final level. Then you could apply a tag of terrain type. So and here it already starts to become very expressive. The terrain type could be oak forest, so you can see it could be really anything, but essentially it goes with this pathway of terrain type, and then putting something in there. So you have now maybe frigid oak forest. Then there's a lot of other things that are more game related, danger level and whatnot. But we can see already from here, there is this sort of like play between kind of that the categories behave like tags, and we'll see this I can actually show another example because I have this book open in multiple directions. And now if I can move this zoom bar, I would actually see them. Yes, okay. Not this one, but this one. Okay, so this is elsewhere in the same book, a more general system. So here we can already see, like, let's pick something that so for example, so if we take, like, you're generating something that is a discovery, once again a category, and maybe I should already highlight that in a way these tags are categories and form categories, or the categories in a very expressive sense. So you have this category of discovery. Underneath there, in this game, there is a roll of dice, which is like your first roll. Is it an unnatural feature, natural feature, evidence, creature, structure, or and so on and so forth. Actually, that's where it ends. But then underneath it, saying the structure, you might roll for, is it, okay, it's a structure, is it an enigmatic infrastructure, dwelling, burial, religious, setting, ruins? And then underneath that, again, like say burial, you might get a grave marker or tomb or crypt, whereas in enigmatic you get earthworks, and then like you might have got a natural feature, you might have gotten terrain change, limited area of another terrain type, which is once again a tag category. So, but if you look at, say, if you pick the sort of burial religious, it has tags underneath, which are this creature responsible, creature in caps, alignment, aspects. And this is kind of intentional that, okay, you got like a tomb or a crypt or shrine, but then it kind of suggests to you that you furbish it, like almost like adding furniture or adding stuff in by getting other tags. And I probably have to scroll several pages, but I can get here. So for example, there was an aspect, the aspect would be here, it's at the end of the book. So you could say for the shrine, you could pick a detail under the category, or sorry, the tag called aspect, which might be like war, lies, discord, like pick one. So it's a shrine that has war in it. Could even be an element, which is then a yet another tag. So inside of this, which might give you fire, so it's a fire shrine. Okay, so you see how this is working in itself. But if you go back to the very beginning where I started here, there is a kind of functional use case here, which is like that it is this sort of quick population that you're just, say, adding tags. So what you're, say, creating a template for a certain kind of a place, and then the tags can kind of populate that template. Like you have a template for a forest, and that has some tags in it, but then when you like need a forest, you pick details, but you get different details. Or you have a tag for say you generate the forest and there is a creature, but for the creature you might utilize other tags like ability, activity. So maybe it's mimic camouflage creature that is currently exploring or lost. So you're moving in this labyrinthine, I'm foreshadowing, labyrinthine kind of sense of meaning, but there, like, all of that is kind of pragmatical, pragmatic in nature, in the sense that, and by having this sort of play between something being a category and then having details and being able to populate something with categories, which then can generate a lot of details, is a way to create permutation and variance. But also having kind of types, like a type of a forest with this, with these tags, I can generate many forests, and this forest part had a creature, and this creature was generated from its tags, and it was a camouflage creature that was currently exploring. You see how it's moving about. Now, I'll stop here for questions, because this is kind of like this behavior of meaning is something I want to highlight, because it kind of stopped me, and I was like, like I need to explore this area a bit. Like, there's actually a lot of things happening here, which, while in this pragmatic context make a lot of sense, but there's more to this than what is here. But I'll ask, like, is this clear, or any comments, or so on and so forth?
I think it's mostly clear. I have a question on the mechanics of the nestedness. Like, is it that you roll the dice and then you get to choose a category, and then you roll the dice again and you detail that category, and you're like slowly adding resolution through rolling the dice and these lists? Is this how it works?
Well, one of the reasons I like this particular writer, that he's sort of able to understand, like, even like adding a mechanic is almost like just like building it on the spot. Like, I think if I scroll up, I can give an example of this. Yes, creature. So you can kind of condense. It's not that you have a like one pathway and then you branch out of it, or you branch into different directions. Like, you might hop in the system, like to a yes, you can come to a creature because you're in a generating for the forest tag, and you get a creature tag, so you come here, and then you start generating creature. And of course, here there are dice rolls. There could be something else. Like, I'm currently, like, to make these examples, I'm just picking. But it's not so much that it's just set on one pathway. It's more already understanding that it can kind of form this kind of things that start from any point. Like, you could also come to this by, I need a creature, like, from anywhere, and generate it. And also, it's kind of like, okay, you can like, this gives you one system, but you can break it however you want in itself. Like, in this case, the creature is like, yes, it's a dice roll. You first roll this one, which gives you either a beast, human, humanoid, or monster. Then you go to, say, beast, and then you throw, is it an earthborn, airborne, or watergoing? But then you could also here select, which is like, actually it won't be airborne because we're in a cellar and not really watergoing. So I'll just throw this earthbound, and then I get a mammoth, and then I discard it because it's not in a cellar. So, but then is it say a snake or a rat or whatever? But then that can lead me, okay, I want to add some aspects that's not listed there, but I want to make it, I want to see an activity for this, say, rat. And then I get, like, it's building. Okay, what is the rat building? So maybe I'll do an adjective to inspire me. So, like, there is something like broken. Okay, so it's using broken stuff to build, like moving like this, which is a way kind of more flexible than just moving in particular pathway.
Yeah, I have a question adding to Pablo, because I was wondering the same. I got this bit, but now my question would be, there's no hierarchy either in choosing, well, you can start with a creature, or does it has to be sort of the category, the environment first? Because you made the example that the creature is in a cellar, but you can also just start from the creature and then building everything around, or you need to start from the category of like the forest,
Well, yes to everything where you said you can. And really the book is written in this manner. There are some, I think, comments towards this in the beginning of the book. But like, so, like, why it's laying these pathways is kind of like, here's a generation method, but it's doing it already understanding that, okay, somebody is just using this, maybe this creature part to generate the creature, and that's completely possible. And it's also like at the same time, maybe being a proponent of this kind of style of tags, which is towards this tags culture, which is talking about, which is like anybody can make these things. So it's even just giving material for other things. So yes, you can start from anywhere, and at the same time, like you can make your own versions, etc. So on. So yes to everywhere. You were saying, is it flexible towards this? And one thing to point, like actually here, like you see the creature,
Activity,
you're throwing,
disposition. that
yeah,
thing.
yeah. So those are tags. So like, okay, actually in the rats we could have thrown the number of appearing. I don't know if it's in the it's not the best organized sometimes, the book, but somewhere here is number of appearing. Actually, it's there. Yes.
Mm.
So yeah, like so size, disposition, so on. So it's giving this, but it's not like these are hard rules. Like for the human, for example, then there's NPC tables, when that opens another area of Labyrinth, which would be here, which is like, okay, it's a human, so it's a in an urban context because the seller, so I'll get like oh, it happens to be a merchant, and well, it's a merchant, so what's its occupation? So it's a spices tobacco merchant. So now you're in another pathway because the tag led you here, and so on and so forth. Any other comments, questions? You say, Mark.
Yeah, I have a point, since we're talking about nested. Since we're talking about nested meaning.
Yes.
In the beginning, you said, okay, so there are tags and there are categories, and all sorts of kind of top row names for things beneath it.
Yeah, the tags are
so-
kind of categories, but
Say
they're a
what?
very expressive way of creating a category.
Yeah. Like, I think there's two sides to this, what I'm trying to say. With an emphasis on trying, apparently. I stumbled across this kind of over this thing, like, so tags, the way I understand them, as a kind of structuring tool, in a way, would kind of, for me, suggest that it's a kind of, you have certain, like, kind of distinct and separate and flying around objects, each of which you can kind of equip with a particular tag, and that will give you, by one technical solution or the other, the possibility to kind of pull them together because they all have the same tag. Obviously, as I then understood afterward, in this case, that seems to not be any function necessary, and therefore also not implemented in the game flow. So that would mean that the term tag could also be replaced with property or something, right? So in a sense, what we're looking at, if I'm correct with this analysis, like, is just basically a kind of array of arrays.
Yeah.
Right? So this is basically, this could all have, none of these really need names. The point here being that they are prepped lists of properties and characteristics that can be accessed in a somewhat structured way via dice roll or by so and so stuff. But the main point here is that somebody wrote down lists of some things, right? So this could be completely scrambled in terms of letter soup. That would make sense to some type of computational reader, for example. But like, So that for me, I think is what like I gathered now from your description. So the first question would be, is that so far correct? And the second question, or like that's not maybe so much a question, is then while this is kind of almost a bit kind of flat or very primary as a way of making a kind of multidimensional suggestion. So like it can be very, very easy because it only has this one, like it's arrays of arrays. The interesting part is then how you go and attack this, the kind of fleshing out of it with tools of meaning, right? Because then you can kind of, then you start creating like landscapes, like mountain ridges of, you know, this means that and relates to this in a particular way.
But like, yeah, a couple of points, like arrays of arrays, yes, but that they could be nameless. I think they would lose a certain key power in it. Because
as a game structure, yes. So I was kind of, the first part of my point was very cybernetic. Like, you know, it's a kind of, as a structure, it's arrays of arrays. There's no, what I'm trying to say is there is no functional difference between a thing that is called category or a thing that is called tag or a thing that is called anything else. They all function the same. So they're all kind of homologic in that way.
Well, in like, I would say functionally they would be different because, and this will appear later, not just here, because if we start using it, the name quality is actually quite important. But the main thing is like, this is like you come up to a creature, not necessarily by searching for a tag, but just thinking of a forest and coming to a creature. But suddenly that word creature starts to behave like a tag, that underneath it opens up an array. Like if it would be nameless, this kind of searching method, or not even a searching method, but encountering method while you're inside of other meaning, how the meaning actually creates a location point that this opens to a creature, which then is a tag. And while to a category, it's, yes, it's a kind of categorical behavior, but then, for example, that the tag of the creature has this sort of functionality hidden in, like, oh, here's a generator, which then leads to further tags, which might have different functionalities. It's a particular way of using categorization. It's not a passive category. It's not just nouns in itself. Like it's not just lists of things, but actually kind of functionalities as well. Like the let's say the players, but this could be not also outside of the game, inside of any meaning, which is also foreshadowing, that you come up on a creature, which is almost like a space that creature opens that can be entered into by having a system that turns into a system of generating a creature in itself. And in other cases, it might turn into a list of words, which is maybe more traditionally categorical. So yeah, it's categorical, but it has a lot of kind of pragmatics hidden in. And it's also like, it's kind of important that it has constantly this sort of interfacing relation interaction with other meaning. If
With
you
other,
take
sorry, what?
with other meaning, like in a way, like you might be just thinking, oh, I need a creature, or there should be a creature in the forest, and that opens up this tag and this generator because there is a word creature. If that
I get that. So like that. So I was just thinking that maybe my point should be structured so that the first part that I spoke about, arrays of arrays, etc., would describe the nested quality of this. The second one, which is what you're talking about, describes everything that unfolds through meaning, right? So if I approach a creature, certainly I'm in a different space and I'm looking for different things and at different things than if I look at buildings or climates or something like that. But that's then what meaning does to the composability of something which without meaning would just be arrays of arrays.
But this is kind of the point, and maybe we can move towards that. This is actually kind of intersecting those two things.
Yes, and
This
so I just
is
wanted to
meaning.
kind of be clear about, did I get that right?
Yeah.
So maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but maybe we can also move on.
Like this is turning meaning into functional, and it's making constant intersections between meaning can be functional. Like the
Yeah.
meaning is actually an operation in some cases, and sometimes it's a word, but those exist, like harmoniously in the same space, which is kind of starts to open this up.
Yeah.
So like we're going to kind of like this is like said a good starting point, but we'll move onwards with the from here, also breaking up the kind of tag and what's hidden underneath. But like it contains this like to highlight this possibility that in the space of meaning, some like concept, like a unit of meaning, can have a functional behavior, and the one behind it can be just a normal meaning, but they can coexist and cooperate. And the tags are also the format of it. It's like almost like a valid form of a concept that it's a tag, and the tag opens up the space. So it can turn into be an array, even though it's in a sentence. So that's a kind of coexistence of different functions of meaning in itself. But okay, that's very abstract, but I'll open up from there. So, okay, maybe the one route towards this. So I started kind of like exploring this into different directions. And one of these possibilities was like, okay, like if I take this tag behavior not being faithful to the tags themselves, even though they're very flexible in and of itself, but for example, I try out that to make a human, I'll take, say, a beast or animal from here, and then just a basic human, like I make a crossbreed of, say, human as a rat, or I don't know if there's a spider, but I could put a spider. Like in some place there is human that has qualities of a spider. So okay, maybe they're building something, and that is like a web-like, maybe not literally, but something that can be a trap or can be just a complex thing. But then I'll add an activity that they are currently for example, relocating or crafting. So maybe they're crafting something in there. And of course that can work. Now I was mixing a kind of crossbreeding these elements with using the elements in and of themselves. And that, of course, was opening up a lot of space, like showing this behavior in other approaches. But then I made an example for myself, like, let's say I made a tag by myself that is, say, fishing village, and then one way to approach that tag would be, okay, to make a fishing village, let's say I'm in a setting that has a lot of fishing villages, and so I want to add tags. So I add seaside adjectives tag, I add village or city events, and village or city buildings, those 3 tags, and then I use those tags to generate details, and I get different fishing villages. So that makes sense. Like, let's say I get a seaside adjective, which is like sound of seagulls and trash or seaweed, like dried seaweed on the coastline. I get like bakery from the city lists, and I get an event of like traveling merchant. But those all fit, like I can, so using those tags, I have now generated a particular event in a fishing village. But if I would pick something else, I would get another kind of event in maybe another fishing village. So that's certainly possible. But I can also think like how these tags can move, like tags are showing kind of possibility to move kind of downwards into more details, like what's contained in the fishing village is what these tags are answering. But I could also move upwards. It's like if I would make a settlement tag, I would include the fishing village, potentially. I could include a village, and underneath this fishing village, and underneath it, seaside adjectives, the list I had earlier. So from any concept, I can move upwards or downwards. And like just taking the behavior here, I can do it fairly pragmatically. But then that kind of opens up the idea that, well, it's not just kind of concepts, it's certainly phrases as well. So I could take a phrase of like a cold, windy winter night in a dead forest. I could put tags underneath that, certainly. Like it's nothing prevents that. But I could also put that underneath forest tag, and then there is like this particular case, which is very particular, but still works in the same fashion. But I could even do this kind of approach to a situation that, let's say, in some place we had this sort of general meaning that we are kind of playing or creating, that we have the sense that like we have like discussed some issues and it has led to this sort of common understanding of something. Let's say, what would be a good example of a common understanding of certain behavior or phenomena of humans, but we don't have one word for it. But we could like explore kind of understanding of that phenomena by putting this kind of tag like categories underneath it to create more meaning towards it. We could go upwards from there as well. So this behavior is actually general behavior in me and its expressions. So what's happening here is not limited to here, but is a possibility of kind of moving about in meaning in multiple ways. But it's also kind of creating certain pragmatic approaches, which is not just lists, but also generators to enable this kind of movement. And while it's mostly doing movement downwards, it kind of already kind of highlights this possibility of movement upwards, you know, like fishing village can be inside a settlement underneath the village in itself, because it's quite as similarly possible as the movement kind of downwards, so to speak. Does this make sense, or am I going too fast or putting too many things at once?
No, this totally makes sense. It's really nice. Like it's a really simple, I would say, like an engine to create settings through these nested components.
Yeah.
In a very powerful way, right? Like you can add detail upwards or downwards depending on the focus you have.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking it's quite interesting how like there's layers of networks across each level, right? Like you have all of the creatures in the game. Then you have like maybe all of the, I don't know, hairy creatures in the game, right? Maybe that is across different types of creatures, not only the earthbound, but also like maybe the flying ones. Both can be hairy underneath. So there's that network. There's the network of creatures. There's the network of only earthbound creatures. And you could have components of the game like, hey, now you are in a setting where you're in court facing all of the earthbound creatures, for example, and you can pull in from there. So that's super interesting. Another thing I'm thinking is that it would be super powerful if the categories are defined through a collective game dynamic, right? So let's say creatures is not yet something that exists, and we say like, okay, what is the category we're gonna add detail to? Let's say it's gonna be machines, right? And now let's create a list of details of those machines.
Yes.
Self-sufficient,
Yeah.
time. I don't know, like I just, yeah, super powerful mechanism to add details to things.
You're way ahead of me because you're kind of getting actually where this is going, but that's good. Like about this time, I kind of put the tags aside and I started thinking about this as a nesting quality. Nesting quality in all meaning in itself, and capability of kind of observing and perceiving a nest in it. Like, but then also like a couple of other things came to mind. First of all, like you said, like you can use this as kind of game mechanic, setting mechanic in itself. But then that immediately points out that it's quite possible to use it even if you don't have many things generated, because the play itself can generate those things. That like at any point, even if you have 3-4 things there, just you can start traveling alongside of those things that are there and generate more. And that can be the kind of one of the tasks or challenges of play. So you're able to set empty area, like, and you can set the empty area in many ways. Like you can say, here's a forest, but you could also say, here is a question, this and this. And that is similarly empty area. And you can start filling that, not by just answering the question, but feeling like, actually, I put these tags under this question. Or these, like this, take the same approach as here. And that allows a kind of similar kind of feeling of things. So there is like a whole range of playability here. But that yes, Linda, yeah, you mentioned that you have to go.
Maybe I'll come back if it's quick. Otherwise,
Yes.
I'll see the recording how it goes. But I might
Yes.
come back if I manage
Yeah.
to run. Thank you.
We'll inform you, and if you come back, you're very welcome. Like, so yeah, but then that brought me to think, okay, I mean, even this kind of play is constantly dealing with empty areas because this is all generation, like, or there's a lot of generation happening, but generation along the lines and contours that are kept on being set. But what are these kind of ways of how this kind of play, or play in general, faces generation as a positive question? Like, not as just like a negative that, oh, that's empty, but kind of positive, that what can we generate here? And this kind of brought me to another branch that interestingly actually came from the same game subculture. So much so that it was the same culture that produced this book, but elsewhere created a kind of an approach called paint the scene. And the paint the scene is a kind of particular play mechanic, which was experimenting with this, like how all players, not just game masters, can generate environment, which is normally kind of the responsibility of the game master. And paint the scene was utilized in a particular manner, or the first kind of mechanic way was, say, like the characters would come into a house in like city that they know, but they would meet a new person, and they would not exactly know what's there. And normally this is then the hands of players. You're not going to tell what's in this room because this is what the game master does. But paint the scene would turn this around and say, like, let's say like this, like the game master, like you've arrived into this room, which is say a bar in some city, and the game master asks, like, what kind of details you notice that make it apparent that this bar is past its better days, that it's kind of like being run down as we like currently. And then each player would answer something like, there's a very fancy window, but it has a lot of cracks on its side, and it would have been changed in a long time ago. And then, like, that the bar where the drinks are is way larger than how many bottles there are. There's only a few bottles left. So this is players painting the scene, like essentially filling the blanks, so to speak. And of course, I picked on this paint the scene because there's something more general behind the game, paint the scene as well. And that is, the paint the scene has this sort of approach that is kind of like a positive way to approach an emptiness. So if we combine these two things a little bit, the direction what Pablo was saying is like, let's say we have an oxo to combine these things from earlier session, that the oxo has the simple description, like last time we had the all artworks are puzzles. But if one picks, say, all human works are puzzles as an oxo. But at this point, there's nothing else in this oxo. It's just this sort of approach that suddenly we'll see all the things that humans produce, artworks included, as kind of puzzles. But then we'll immediately, like taking that, we'll paint the scene with the players that come in. And let's say I'm one of the players, and I make an example, is that in this oxo, I see a person reading a book written by someone else. And then we have extra, Eva is coming. So I'll say hello. And then I'll slightly rewind the example to that it becomes understandable. Hello, Eva. You arrived in the middle of an example, and I will roll it back to 10 seconds that it's not missing its head, and that you don't only get the tail. So
Thank you.
Making an example of a paint the scene mechanic, which I won't explain the whole because that takes a little bit of time, but maybe the example works in itself. So we have this sort of oxo that is still quite empty, which is now just have this approach of all human works, not just artworks, but all human works are puzzles. And then the paint the scene is facing this in itself like an approach with a lot of blankness in it, by asking players to generate something towards it. And as an example, if I would take a paint the scene mechanic, this is from Fringe Games, towards this all human works are puzzles, I could paint the scene like seeing a fragment of a snapshot or a snapshot of a situation where somebody is reading a book by somebody else, and they're taking a word from it and checking it in a dictionary, and then trying to fit, how does this meaning that the word does fit with the text? And then maybe then some other player towards this oxo would generate something else, like there is a painter who is painting a painting, and they suddenly step back because they don't know what to put in the middle. And then somebody walks in and asks, but what does it represent? So all of this is kind of generating material for this, let's say, reflections towards this all human works are puzzles. Similarly, as the earlier example of this paint the scene, people generating material for the bar. And one could even say that this sort of painting the scene could come through a certain question in itself. But however it's done, like for me, like this sort of example of a human checking from dictionary and trying to fit the word in itself is a kind of a starting point. It's kind of putting a little bit of material into this blankness of the all human works are our puzzles oxel. Is this direction clear? I know I put, like, once again, a lot of things in one, but does it make sense?
It does, but I was here since the beginning, so don't want to speak for everyone.
But how do you, like, maybe you can explain something of it in your own words, because that might help others.
I mean, I think it's a continuation of the of this fractal capacity
Yes.
to add details, to add meaning, where it, yeah, through sort of like players or people being able to define the spaces that open up to be filled with details. Yeah, I guess that would be a short explanation.
I mean, but it's so, like, just to be sure that I'm also on the map, like the difference between this example, which I think runs under the headline painting the scene, and the previous excursion into the Perilous Wilds game, is that in the Perilous Wilds you have a rather extensive pre-made fundus of, like, you know, an author has pre-written these, and there's a certain speed, and but also kind of maybe, well, it doesn't matter, like there's a certain, you generate the scenes or whatever, creatures or whatever out of those, and in the painting the scene, it's kind of produced on the spot, thought up on the spot by people, entities, densities playing that game together, right?
Well, they're kind of closer than one thinks. So to take an example, so this might also help Eva to get snapshot from the earlier part. But okay, so this generator of a creature, which might be that you're reading this forest and you're generating a creature, doesn't actually give you a whole creature. So it gives you this sort of, like, suddenly that, like, nest of creature, but I actually need to turn it into details, turns into, I mean, in this case, a dice roll, where you might give you a beast. But then it gives you, actually, I should also check I'm calling them now nests, not tags, like nest of activity, disposition, number of peering, size. So I might get a beast of the, let's pick something different than earlier, like maybe a snail. So I'm simulating dice rolls. But then into the snail, I maybe get like activity of, say, traveling, maybe number of peering is solitary. There's some others that disposition, curious, traveling, curious, solitary. But the key thing to underline here, I'm not getting the whole creature. I'm getting Lego blocks. I'm getting ingredients. I'm not getting a final meal. I'm getting carrots and some something else, but I have to cook the creature. So there is a blankness here. So it's giving composites, but what if everything that is written in this book is not final? It's actually, everything is kind of in an ingredient form. And this is why they're closer. That while in the case of the Oxel being quite empty, having just this sort of approach, like, let's approach all human creations or works as puzzles, that's very empty still. But it's still an ingredient. It's a small ingredient, or living with a lot of blankness. And here there are more ingredients, but they're both ingredients. And this is the kind of where they correlate or intersect, like the sense of well, maybe that's enough. Like, I was starting another trajectory, but that's maybe enough stuff in one. Is that kind of understandable? This sort of like that both are actually giving you ultimately, you have to make this.
Sure, they are gradually different in
Yes.
one being a little pre-scripted or like,
Yeah.
however
Yes.
much like with large detail, the other one not. But of course, the construction is not. It doesn't fall out of an automaton. You just throw a coin in and get a thing, but you have to put it together. It's just, I think it is interesting in such way, the difference that obviously everything that is kind of mentioned also like or written down also kind of opens to spaces beyond itself. It can also stimulate you to say, okay, actually this just says age, alignment, aspect, condition, etc. But I actually want to think of this and this. That's obviously included if players agree on that possibility. But there's a kind of certain, not certain, there is simply an openness in the other approach, for better or worse, I don't know, to even coming to decide upon what's the protocol we're evoking here.
Yeah, like I agree. The difference is gradual. Like both are essentially offering ingredients for generation, like to be generated by play. But of course, in this case, compared to the very blank one, they're much more in the here's a bunch of ingredients, whereas in the first one, it's just here's one ingredient, or like you have to generate way more. But still, like that puts them in the same scale. But I want to open up now, like think about this, like putting all of this various things together, how we move from tags to how all meaning is nesting, and then there is a possibility, as Pablo perceptively noticed, like that there, like also that there is this sort of possibility of blankness, like always there, like, and then there's sort of how there are practices of play that meet this sort of blank as a positive thing, like it's the challenge for play. Like the paint the scene approach is an example of this, that it's actually a positive thing that, oh, like now our blankness is this bar, and the bar is, then it's turned into a question, how does this bar show that it's past its prime? And then people generate answers towards it, like the cracked mirror. This is like positive for play, that we turn the blankness into something that is inspiring in a way. But yeah, all of that, and then think of this, like, okay, we have this OXO, which is like all human creations works are puzzles, intentionally kind of very empty one. And then let's say the first play is paint the scene, and maybe that produces this kind of things, like somebody creates a snapshot moment of somebody reading a text and checking a dictionary and trying to fit the word, the meaning they get into the text. Or the other example was this sort of painter painting a painting and then coming to this point where they don't know what to add, and then somebody walks in and says, what does this represent? It's a very much snapshots and fragments, but they're populating display. Now, from there, we could go, for example, that let's say we play the scene, because it's a paint the scene. So we play the scene of, like, we start playing in this, like, say, this person checking from the dictionary, and somebody brings in real text. And then we suddenly stop on a certain word and start questioning of how does this fit here? So we take that kind of snapshot as a kind of framework and play that in the frame of all human creations are puzzles, with a real text in itself. But now, like once we are playing that scene, we pick up things that we generate in that play. Is that, let's say, in that play, what could happen is that, like somebody comes up with this technique of how, whenever you're reading a text, you can take this attitude of, like, if I start from this word here in the middle of the text, or this phrase, and I try to compare it to the different sentences and words in the text elsewhere, it's kind of like fitting or trying to solve a puzzle. But then there is like infinite puzzles in a text. And somebody writes this down and puts it in this voxel as a seed or a nest. So the play in itself can come to populate the voxel, which started out just being one sentence. Like there comes this sort of nest that describes a reading style, reading in the form of a puzzle, and then it has these instructions of like pick any word or phrase and start comparing it and contemplating of how it like fits like a jigsaw piece or doesn't fit with the other pieces, like picking different sentences from different parts. And then that is put into the voxel. And now the voxel is a little bit more populated. But you could pick other things and put them in the voxel, and then it kind of grows from there in itself. Like so this is kind of showing these different pathways of how something that can be very simple and very minimal can be a starting point. But then there are techniques of play, like to paint the scene, of like engaging with this blankness. But then engaging with this blankness can generate material that can be then played further, like turning that snapshot that was created of like checking a word from a dictionary into a moment of play, which then can generate approaches which can go back to the voxel and populate it, and therefore make it richer, and suddenly start to grow this approach of all human creations are puzzles into something more complex, sophisticated, nuanced, detailed. That's a lot of things again, but does this pathway make sense?
I want to say something, but I will wait for somebody to respond to that exact question.
Makes sense.
Can you put it in your own words? Like again, because like I
Yeah,
definitely trust you. I'm not asking that, but more like your words probably put it in a better way.
This is a test, Pablo.
No, it's not.
yeah, I
Just,
can
it's
see.
more like
I can sense that.
put your words, because mine are probably too much in the weeds, and maybe your words put it better.
I think bringing it down to XORG language, this is an engine to, as you said, engaging with the blankness. So I guess it's an engine to fill slots through play. So to define voxels as spaces available, like with available space inside, and then having different mechanics to engage with that space, whether it's the more nested tags that is in a way more constrained and structured, or whether it's more like the painting the scene, which has more of a free form through language, through poetic language. But I guess they are both mechanics to engage creatively with slots.
Yes, and this is some sketches also of play techniques of kind of filling this sort of blankness, whether it's kind of like a neat slot form or really this sort of open horizon, like if you put this sort of one sentence voxels of all human creations are puzzles. I intentionally picked like a big one with a lot of blankness. It's kind of like expanding all around that, but you can still play it by, say, this sort of paint the scene is like impressionistic way of finding situations that feel where the human creation work feels like a puzzle. But then if you create those become new playing forms, like for example, turning that into a scene in an XORG way, like playing that scene in itself by maybe picking a real text and finding impressions of where the puzzleness is. But when you're playing it, it allows also for, like, in a way, picking berries or picking fruits, and kind of bringing them back to the oxel to populate it itself. That's and I do think that whole, because of course that's a loop, but that's also a loop that kind of fills a purpose. It kind of allows starting from very small, but then coming up with ways of playing how that smallness can be already played, but then how that play can come to feed that blankness with material, give it more detail, which means that then people who come later to play it have more than just the one sentence, for example. Like they might have this one sentence, but they have a certain way of reading, just to use the earlier examples of seeing text as puzzles, but they might have a lot more depending on what's generated in the play itself.
I wonder a bit about the metaphor of a puzzle, because it implies that you have pieces that actually fit together, and they, like with a puzzle, you always have, you want to make it fit. And I don't see everything what you describe right now as that, like it can fit, but like there are n more possibilities of how you can match or not match things.
Yeah.
So basically, I'm just questioning the metaphor, which is just a minor thing.
Yeah, no, it's you're completely right. I'm kind of like partly I'm kind of sidestepping because like I don't know a good concept for something that is like a puzzle, but it's open-ended. Like most of the puzzles are like that there is a right answer for it, but you can have a
Composition.
puzzle. What, sorry?
Composition.
But then it misses the kind of puzzling quality. Like it's composition can be anything in itself. Like if you want to combine the attitude that is in the puzzle, like I have to figure this out. I don't have the thing itself, and then
Combination.
What's sorry?
A combination that goes until the lock almost.
But it's still like missing the, like all of this, like the puzzle is almost like it sets up a game, like play this. Like it's an ingredient of quality, whereas composition and combination might be ready and often are.
There's
like,
a very boring, and I hate myself for giving this example, but Lego pieces. Right there, a bit puzzly, open-ended. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
like n-dimensional Lego pieces.
Yeah.
I wanted to make a suggestion. So since I take it that we're in the domain of looking at generation systems for generating, or systems is a bit of an odd thing, but you know, ways or tools, or because I think the practicality of like last session was really enjoyable, and I think there's now such a load of, you know, such a wealth of things that would seem to be offering themselves to be played with. I was wondering if we could maybe do a little finger exercise at this point. And I was thinking, and it is maybe you know, alpha version of a proposal for it, that we could a bit recap or gather together what types of generating methods, what's the good word to use here, techniques, we now spoke about or we have gathered from elsewhere. And then we could, each of us could go maybe a bit again alone, I don't know, to go through to conduct, let's say, maybe a 3-step generation process in which from each step to the next, the generator, one would use another generator. So you try one way of coming to step 1, whatever it is that you're creating or you want to be creating, and then you try to change the generation mechanism, or maybe even not. Maybe you just test it a second time, but maybe at some point you throw in another way that you think might be fertile for coming to, you know, what is the goal? Additional detail, I guess, or additional texture, or whatever is the goal of generating such. Would that be is that, or like, what do you think?
I think it's a good idea, but it would also kind of probably benefit from recapping, particularly because Eva missed the beginning of the kind of tags and nesting, which was kind of like a practical way of getting here.
But can we do this exercise together maybe for this time?
Yeah, that's a possible. I would be open to that. Like, yeah, let's do it together because that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So
should we limit the time for recapping to like some 3 minutes?
Yeah, we could still do a short recapping and then do it together, like combine this.
Yes, but I think just it would be nice not to kind of keep the recap crisp, and then maybe do that thing together.
Yes.
Okay, then I will set a timer.
Well, I tried to base this challenge of recapping all of this into 3 minutes. Okay, so we started with
3 good? Yeah, good. Okay.
Okay, well, we'll try. So we started with a particular pick from a French gaming culture early to 2010s, which was this sort of particular concept of tags and how they approach tags, which is different from the norm, which is this first the idea that okay, to generate a place, you might utilize this sort of tags, which are kind of categorical, but more functional and pragmatic towards generation. So for, say, a place, you could first, like it has the tag of a climate, and then you could choose, okay, it's frigid. Then you might have a terrain type, but this is way more open. But it's you could have like an oak forest, for example. So now you have like, say, frigid oak forest, and then you might put other tags in there. The tags being like, okay, consider the climate. That has a lot of options, but that also makes the places different. Like that if you had like tags for a forest, you might have a climate, you might have like tree types, you might have a possibility of there being a creature or not, whatever it is. And utilizing those tags, you could generate different kind of forests by picking up different details, which is sort of shown here. Like, I mean, here's the details. These are more not for environment. This is another case of how it's used, but it shows like towards, say, a creature, you might need scroll, like if it's a human, there's an activity, alignment, disposition, but you could also have a behavior. So then so ability could be that it's a human that is like, let's say, blessing or cursing, or entangled, like, and then activity is traveling. So now for this human, I have like, it's traveling because it's entangled in a messy plot of that they gotten themselves entangled to. And I could even pick a aspect, which might be, say, knowledge intelligence, is that they are entangled in it because they were informing about it and so on. But if I would pick different details from these different tags, I would get a very different human in itself. So the tags are kind of ability to say, okay, you want to make a human-like creature, pick an ability, activity, and an aspect, and something else maybe. So they function as the simple generators. But once you look at this situation and you say, like, there's more going on here, like this particular structure is pointing out to a wider quality than this. And that quality is this sort of like almost anything can be turned into a nesting. Like I could take the word or concept of fishing village, and then I could think, okay, I need the tags of seaside adjectives, events in a city or village, and maybe buildings in a city or village. And then I can use those to generate like a seaside village. I get maybe like from the seaside adjectives, I get like the dried seaweed on the beach. And then from the village buildings, I get like a warehouse. And then I get from events in a city like a traveling merchant. This allows me to generate some details, fragments towards the fishing village in itself. So it's not just happening in these particular things that are here, but it's actually a quality or a way of defining any meaning, whether word or phrase or just meaning that we hold into this sort of generated form by populating with this sort of ingredients. Like I could make the same thing for a human sense of time. I could put there like a certain kind of feeling. I'm asking that. I'm putting there of like a snapshot of human life in inside spaces. And then I get, like, let's say, gloomy, and I get somebody eating food, and that those can be ingredients for a sense of time. So this behavior of meaning is like a different kind of way of looking at how meaning is born, not just by definition, but really by kind of ingredients for generation. And there could be a lot of things said in that direction, and I'm already packing too many things into too short description. But this opens up this sort of other kind of way of thinking about populating meaning into some space. Like, for example, an empty oxel with the idea of like all human creations or works are puzzles. But also populating it in a way that it doesn't become just defined, but actually comes populated with ingredients of play. That's a way too short a package and probably was a little bit too condensed. But maybe it gives us some starting point and hopefully opens up more in if we play together towards such a thing.
That was good. Let's do an exercise. Let's play. I don't know exactly how though. Martin, do you have an idea?
I thought about, like, when Pekona was recalling this first part, I think that one can't really play that one without having a list of some attributes and of having a bit of structure, right? Like, otherwise we'd have to come up with that. We'd have to make it up. So like, if somebody is in the position of generating anything, they'd have to maybe, you know, so to speak, crowdsource from the rest, whatever adjectives are there. So we could, you know, simulate, we could crowd simulate lists of adjectives as one possibility.
I have an idea. Like, we could even play this like a very empty oxel. There's all human creations are puzzles or artworks are puzzles, by utilizing this paint the scene, which is like just seeing a snapshot of it. Would that be a kind of workable direction?
Yeah, let's do all artworks, just so that it's a bit
easier.
more constrained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or do you think Sorry, do you think we could think of more than this one voxel? Could we come up with a couple of voxels that we could activate?
I'm wondering if it makes things easier or harder.
Right.
So I mean, just to go through the paint the scene, because that was also before or explained just before Eva arrived. The paint the scene is the sort of the face is sort of kind of blank space or a space that has some contour, like here it would be the all artworks and puzzles. And then the paint the scene is asking the players to see some kind of snapshot in that space, like my example of somebody reading a text and checking up a word and trying to fit it into the meaning of the text. That would be paint the scene. I've made a snapshot of that. But if I play an example towards this all artworks are puzzles, of course, it would be cheating to play the same, even though that would work. There's checking on the word for the text. But to generate a new one, I would pick this moment of somebody standing in front of a painting and saying, like, let's say a mostly abstract painting, and saying, I'm seeing a horse, and then somebody asking inside of them, where do you see a horse? And then like they would point out, well, it's here and there, and then like that's not really a horse, it's almost like a unicorn, and there would be this sort of conversation. That's a fragment of all artworks are puzzles.
I want to try to add to open up the space for the ambiguity of the horse with some possible characteristics of precisely why the horse is ambiguous, and maybe it's a unicorn, maybe a Pegasus. What kind of horse-like creature is this?
I would turn the ambiguity into a nest, and I would add there the Lego blocks of memory, which contains this idea that, like, whenever you're facing an artwork, you use your memory as Lego blocks to construct it. And that's something that is now nested underneath the concept of ambiguity in Pablo's example or scene.
I'm taking notes, but I also want to allow Eva to play if you want. Otherwise, I can move. I can make a move.
Make the move if you have one.
Also, you can throw in anything, given that you have the most challenging position because you haven't heard the pieces beforehand. So, like, throwing anything on the board is always possible.
Yeah.
And Martin is having to give his attention a little bit to his family, so he's probably not making moves. So.
I just want to, yeah, like the move of like the Lego pieces as being sort of populated from memory. I find that super interesting. Horse-like related memories. I want to open the space of like the details of the horse as possible, of the horse-like creature as possible ways of adding detail. So we can focus on the head, we can focus on the color, we can focus on the tail, the color of the fur, the number of legs. Just opening up some spaces for detail.
I would open up there like, well, if I would have like an image library, I would actually now pull quickly like images that are not horses, like really maybe even almost randomly. Or maybe I would actually pick abstract paintings and then pose a puzzle of find the horse or see the horse. See the horse and describe it as a kind of minor mini game. Which is, of
I would
course,
like,
you said,
go ahead.
I'll shut up.
Go ahead.
And I didn't need to add anything. Like it was more like how this is like a mini game in the quality of the all artworks are puzzles.
I would like to shift a little bit the attention from the horse in the abstract painting to the scene itself again, and what does it do to the conversation itself. And maybe we also can spend or look at the details of the painting itself. What would happen if we turn around the painting by 90 degrees? Is it still a horse?
Yeah.
How would the colors or like the perception of colors change, and how would it change the constellation between the two people?
I would take from there, and this could also go back to the oxel itself as potential material, this sort of, let's call it the manipulating, or almost like abusing the manipulation of the artwork, like doing the wrong moves in it, say, you turn it the wrong way, as a method of all, like approaching all artworks as puzzles. Like this can be like, it's not like, okay, this is the one method that gets you to the final point, but it's more like it's a method to walk into this direction of all artworks are puzzles. So turning the painting into into directions where it's not meant to be.
I am prompting stable diffusion for a photograph of an abstract painting of a horse-like creature rotated 90 degrees. And I'm getting mediocre results, but I can share maybe the best one.
Do share if
These are really bad. These look absolutely like horses.
did you should I give you the sharing for a moment?
No, I can just put it on the Telegram chat, and you can,
All right,
if you
okay.
want, show it. It's also funny that, yeah, people will just receive this random image.
I put in like a absolutely neutral search of abstract painting, or not absolutely neutral, but close. Found these two paintings, or well, several. Picked it two. Now I can even do this. And this allows me to do this, to turn it around, to take Eva's case. But then also we can bring this figuring out, I mean, now actually I have to say it because the horse example was there. I actually do see a horse. Do you see my mouse cursor, by the way?
Yes, we see that,
Yes.
and the horse.
Yes, I see actually two horses. Like one was kind of, here is the eye and the forehead, and then here's the snout. It's moving forwards, but then I saw a horse where this was the eye, and it's weirdly turning its snout, and it's kind of twisted and elongated in a forest background. And I would like, I don't know yet how to extract and put it in, but I think we're kind of close to a kind of practice of treating like just one out of million of how to treat artworks as puzzles. But it's like one way to play this in a way, which could be extracted and put into the OXO to give more material for people to play it.
A good image came out. It's in the XORG Telegram group. Not that one. Yeah, that one.
Yeah. I think it's on my screen now, actually.
Yep.
Yeah. But of course, you can always change the, I mean, now it was find the horse, but it's really find the X. So it could be find the sadness or the sense of longing. So find the sense of longing in this picture. I found one, but I'll leave it to others because I'm populating the space too much.
I find the sense of longing.
Longing or belonging?
You can
longing.
take either. I was going longing, but belonging is good.
I will do longing as the space between the pieces of the puzzle that seem very different from one another. Like on the middle right, there's like the edges between them are clear. I see that space as the space of longing.
That's a good one. That is a good one. It's already much more interesting picture now that you added this. Now I see another possible extraction, which is like you add this artwork and you add that, and then you like give it as like a space that doesn't collapse. Like collapse being this nerdy term where things become one. There's no other things. It's a logical term, but it's a really good one. So collapse would be, oh, this means this, and then it only means that. Like if you give this Pablo's reading, but it's more like a dots in a constellation rather than a collapse. This could even be kind of like somebody's adventures in the all artworks are puzzles. Pablo's adventures in the all artworks are puzzles. Episode, whatever, one. But I'll play to your like sense of this connection of pieces. The sense of belonging and longing, which is like the quality of having the jigsaw pieces here in the first place, like in the whole picture, and that the jigsaw piece in itself has a sense of belonging that we project to it, that it belongs to a larger picture. But here the lines of the jigsaw remind us of like without it, this sense of belonging that is in the jigsaw piece wouldn't be present if the jigsaw wouldn't be apparent. The jigsaw piece in itself is an image of belonging and longing for belonging. And if I would extract this, I would add this, that there is this picture, Pablo's description and my description, and this is a play space already for all artworks are puzzles among the million possibilities or infinite.
I would like to point out that also the pieces themselves have this element of ambiguity, as the horses in the beginning, because especially in that image we're looking at, it's like it's a disturbance of a jigsaw puzzle because the pieces are somehow distorted, and there are a lot of lines, so you can arrange them in a different way. I don't think there's just one way of how to place them, like structurally and content wise, because the image is distorted, but also the structure it lays on is distorted, which is again interesting.
It kind of brings to my mind, I don't have a full formulation of this thought yet, is that how, like every jigsaw piece meeting the other is a combination of sense of belonging and a kind of interaction to try to find it, which doesn't always work. Which makes the jigsaw piece a really interesting figure in itself. Like it has a sense of belonging and longing for belonging, which it then sometimes tragically, sometimes happily finds. But then adding to it, there is another layer. I would keep this separate but connected, which is that sometimes the jigsaw pieces find connections that don't serve a larger picture, which is another motivation above them. And sometimes the individual jigsaw pieces go against the larger whole. Sometimes they go for the larger whole. But from the point of view of jigsaw piece, this might be needed, their possibility of having their own decision, which is sort of an interesting thought connecting to what Eva was saying.
Can we open up another piece, or like this is just one example of an entire dimension, and I still struggle how we can to understand, okay, all artworks are puzzles. Let's move to another artwork.
Okay, let's do that.
Within the same scene.
The same scene in the sense of like, okay.
You painted the scene.
Yes, all right. So, I mean, there was this one, but I can give you the choice. Like, you can say stop.
Aha, or not necessarily in the same scene.
Okay. So, in which way you mean scene?
I think that's my question.
I mean, it could go many ways. That's the what is in the scene and where does it go is a playable question. But what was your sense of it?
I struggle formulating my own thoughts of what I don't or what I still would like to explore is we have now this, or like this one capsule of meaning of the scene you painted, but the scene, or like we have that scene, but all the what we inscribed in there could be completely something else. That's clear. But how can we, do you see this one scene now as an oxel? Or is it what we inscribed in it? Like, I mean, the ambiguity, the jigsaw pieces, and so on.
I mean, both are possible. Like oxels are kind of also this sort of have an infinite nesting capability. Like oxels can contain oxels. One way to look at this, because it's always a question of how do you want to navigate it. And here's how I was looking at it, but it's not like this is the way, but just one way, was that there was this oxel that starts with just the simple statement that all artworks are puzzles. And then we went into that oxel, which is kind of like it's an approach, but it doesn't give you much. But in order to populate it, we went to these different scenes to play this, to take it with us, even though it's very minimalistic in what it gives, but it gives us something. And then we came up with this sort of different let's say, approaches that sort of harmonize with it, like, for example, find X in a thing, but also your, like, the kind of possibility to turn the painting, which is kind of like abusing what is the right way of looking at a painting in itself. And this gives us more, like now there's more to the oxel, and those could be written into the oxel itself. Like find the X in a painting as a technique of entering this oxel practice of all artworks and puzzles. Just one among practical infinity, as is your technique of turning the painting itself. So so then we came to the scene within this oxel of taking this particular, well, two kind of paintings, the first one and this jigsaw one that Pablo generated, which then became a generating point for us, which was this sort of, where do we find, well, the first one was, where do we find the horse? That was the X, but then the second one was the, where do we find the belonging? So we were using the same method of play, which then generated from it this different things said by us, which could have turned into even an example of play, but therefore also something that is an ingredient of play, of taking that picture and then the things said about it as a kind of constellation, but that can still feed the oxel, because it then can inform somebody of, like, oh, all artworks of our puzzles, but what do I do? But then they get this method, and then they get these results of the method, and that all informs them, and they're like, oh, I can play this way, but maybe I take this painting. So that's kind of how I've been thinking about it, but that's certainly not the only way to think about it.
In the meantime, I've generated variations of the image, and they're really nice.
All right.
If you wanna.
Which one would you like to pick?
From the last group, maybe the last image.
The last being the...
That one, yeah, exactly.
All right. I will even do the enhancement of saving it, and then where do I have to go? Here, I have to press reload, and then I have to press this. And here, because this offers me the possibility of turning it, just to bring this quality in. I mean, we have this one traveling method in this oxel, which is find the X, where it's one traveling method with infinite traveling methods, because the X could be anything, but it's still just one method. But we could also think of others. And of course, we can revisit, or like even find the horse, find the belonging, but find the whatever, but then develop another. Like one possibility is this. Let's say if I take this sort of turning it, and if one finds something, how does the one thing change if you turn it?
Mm.
Like, to give an example, I find an entity somewhere here, like this is the head and this is the body, and this is maybe another head, but I'm keeping it open what kind of entity it is. It also might be, okay, I have an example. I like this one, so I'll tell this one. There is an entity that is sort of bull-like, which is the body is here and the head is here, but it's chasing a mask, which might be an ideal of itself, the mask being here, or an idea of another kind of being in itself. Do do you perceive that? Like, okay, here is a leg, here's a back leg, here's a front leg, here's a head, and it's turned, the head is turned towards this, which is the mask-like thing. And the mask is floating over the sea, and the creature is on a beach, just at the point where the beach turns to water, and seems to be potentially running towards the mask, but who knows?
And you said the mask is an idea of itself, like it's chasing the idea of itself.
Well, if all artworks are puzzles, this is not what it necessarily is, but it's a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, something to that effect as a possibility.
I would like to add that in each step this creature takes towards the mask, or maybe not, the mask changes, therefore changing the idea of itself.
Mm.
But it's with each step, like very definite,
Okay,
quantized to each step. Yeah.
I would like to propose a branchway from here, taking what you said. It's a branchway because we don't have to follow it, but it's a possibility that this is how this creature exists, that it always sees this mask in front of it, where, like, throughout its life, that keeps on changing as it like gets closer to it. And then there's a question, does it ever reach it or not? It's like a corridor in this possibility dungeon of this painting we're moving in because it's a puzzle. And that sentence should make sense in this weird space that we're in.
I would like to shift the perspective once more and shift it onto the mask itself and its qualities of change, because what if we invert the situation like the jigsaw puzzles? Like it's always like there's always the concave and convex situation, so there's an inversion as an element. And for example, out of the perspective of the mask, what if the creature to the right changes and it's not a bull or a horse, but for example, I see a turtle in there. There is the head is on the top left, there is a leg, and it's kind of walking away from the sea. So kind of the opposite of what the bull is doing.
Okay. So there is a bull that sees a mask, and then there is a turtle that also sees a mask, like a different creature, but is walking away from.
Rather, what if now you're looking from your perspective is the creature on the right looking at the mask? What if we change that and you switch and take on the perspective of the mask? So whenever the mask takes a step, also the creature is changing. So there is this pace of, we have a bull, it takes a step. Then there is the turtle. Like with every blink.
I get you. I think I get you, because so it's the mask taking the steps, and then the creature might change, for example, from the bull to the turtle. Or
yes.
Yeah, and
that's great. That's amazing. I would say that this shape-shifting capacity resides on the relationship to the mask, since the mask is holding an idea of itself. In the distance between the mask and the creature, there's the possibility of shape-shifting.
This is cool. Actually, yes, the mask, the more distance it has, the more identity it has separate from the creature, and more closer it is, the more merged it is with the creature itself. I would like to mix into this, which increases the puzzleness, but nobody said that this is a solvable puzzle, is that the mask, like the water or the blue color, the waterness, is a quality that the mask holds, in the sense that this creature always sees water in front of itself, that it's always on the kind of like when it's moving or changing, it's always on the brink of water, like just on the beach line where the water starts, and the mask is always in the water. Wherever it is, it sees like superimposed water in front of itself, which is like the realm of the mask.
I would like to distort that idea again. What if the color perspective, or I would propose a pathway where the also colors invert again and again. For example, what if the water becomes the sand or just the color of the sand? So change or swapping or playing with the illusion of what is land, what is water, and where is what.
I would like to extract from here like a technique of artworks branching into constellations, that you start to generate these methods, and rather than collapsing them into one, you intentionally kind of keep these different directions as kind of opening up from there. And this could enter into the all artworks are puzzles Oxel as a method in itself, like how to perceive artworks. Not the way, but just once again, like equipment or instruments in that space.
I want to add to the going back a bit to the creature, that for me it makes sense that the creature can only run across this coastal line of ever shifting terrain, because it's a place of constant ambiguity that is like moving between the land and the sea back and forth, and also shifting between what is land and what is sea. So the creature can only, it exists in an amphibian space of meaning, right? So it has to run along this coastal line. It's the only place you can find it.
I would like to just highlight the sentence amphibian sense of meaning as a puzzle in itself. So I would like to make that a micropore that becomes its own puzzle as an artwork that can be opened again and again, but doesn't have to be solved. The amphibian sense of meaning.
I would like to shift our attention to the directionality of this, what we just painted. There's the oscillation of creature. There's the oscillation of the locality of sea and island or sand, and there's this strong direction. It's like a section or the movement of the creature that's just able to move back and forth, like in parallel of the coastline, which paints a string of movement.
How do you see the string? Like, I have an idea for it, but like I would like to hear your version of the
String is the wrong word. It creates an amalgam of different types of movement, of like there's this one line of the creature going back and forth, and like everything around there is oscillating. It creates different vectors, and I'm liking the word, but I think you get a sense of what I try to paint, these different directions and states.
I would like to
knit.
I would like to knit to your description, which is like putting a thread into it, but keeping it separate. That this creature describes its life as that it's weaving its life into existence by stringing, like weaving the string on this coastal line, but it leads to kind of weaving, which is kind of like creating a fabric. behind it, which is the sand, maybe. That's sand with a question mark. And I would like to knit it because I'm not saying it's that, but it's a possibility of kind of reading your saying with this. Oh, sorry, this was, oh yeah, here. There's also this possibility.
Oh my God. Just like you're rotating meaning itself.
Yes, I am.
I'm getting meaningfully dizzy.
So yeah, let's take all of that and then rotate it into an inverse, perhaps.
But this is kind of part of what we just painted, like this ambiguity and oscillation of different, or we painted the dizziness.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess I'm just confronted with the nature of this creature.
Which is
And
the
then-
mask right now.
Oh yeah, like
I think the
Yeah.
mask is now the different entity
yes,
on top.
yeah, it is somewhat seems to me stronger. Like there's a sense that the creature is falling, and the mask is somehow holding them still from the fall. Like the creature is falling with everything else, sea and whatnot, but the mask is holding them into a position like I don't know quite how, but that's my sense of it somehow. I also see that in this falling, so the turtle, now it's an upturned turtle, but it's not only an upturned turtle, but it's a turtle with a hole in its shell. That's its name, the hole being here. And it's not only falling from water, like upside down, but then from its hole in the shell, the water is falling.
Maybe it's the creature itself that brings the coast into existence through the water falling off. Like it's creating the sea. It creates its own space of ambiguity to be amphibious.
Oh yeah, the amphibiousness of meaning, and because that made me think that it's actually like falling the water out of its shell to create the coastline. That like to have a coastline, and the coastline here means something for it to walk, something for it to advance, at least in a different way than water, to have a foothold, so to speak, because also this area in this turning of the painting, there's a very strong emphasis on the foothold, even though it's kind of inverted, but it becomes very strong for me. There's like a foothold. So from its shell, from its hole in the shell, it drains the water to create the possibility of having a foothold. Yeah.
I would like to add another layer to that. And I see an overlay of all the fallen spirits, or that found their space in the place, or in the space of longing, what we discussed before. All of them A lot of horses facing us, looking at us.
All of them, what was the word? All of them, and then you had a sentence that I didn't get.
Facing us, looking at us, woven together in the space of the jigsaw pieces. It's like a meta layer of the scene.
But did
The
you say
scene of
what,
decay.
but did you say what is the them, or was it open?
Come again?
Did you say like all of them? Did you say what is the them, or did you leave it open?
The spirits of the
Oh, the
fallen
spirit.
creatures.
Yeah, okay, so
Maybe, maybe not.
yes. I would like to point out how this fits this sort of like a almost like branching out constellation model rather than collapsing in. Like it's a different kind of question on the artwork, which is like that there is this sort of suggestion of collapse it, say what it means, like find out what it means. But this is working inverse, which is actually kind of creating ever more directions which are non-collapsible that remain as this sort of branches of traveling. That every one of these pathways can be seen as a branch of traveling from the work. So it opens up to a map rather than collapses to a point of meaning.
This has been great. I need to go soon, but this, yeah,
Yeah,
I have
think
really enjoyed the creation of this creature.
I agree, and I think we're nearing the closure. I would just say that there is something very fertile here, not just in this painting, but the approach, which I think still like there is a kind of trace in the whole pathway, which is this sort of all artworks are puzzles, but then turning into play. I think there is even more to that pathway in this, like, which I tried to kind of highlight this with this tracing, that you can kind of bring up from something of your adventures and leave it for others, which can be really anything. Can be this painting, and particular examples could be recording of this, could be the structural things, but all of them can be material for play. And in my notes, one of my ending points towards this is that if one follows this direction, the voxel itself can behave like a setting. That it becomes this sort of place of adventures, which are kind of like locations, but the locations can have almost like tasks, quests, adventure like things, scenarios. They don't have to be so exact, but they can have such natures in itself, and that is something that opens from this whole pathway, which I think we are kind of witnessing in a way. I mean, other things as well, but that is along with all the other things we've discovered.
Totally. I think this exercise felt closer to the description of painting the scene, or was that the name? Painting the scene?
Yeah, paint the scene, painting the scene, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I would be curious if we can sort of extract a more systematized version that feels closer to the first example of tags through this creature. Like, what are the characteristics of it, right? Like, is ambiguity a term that can be generalized? like the terrain in which it walks, like maybe, yeah, so that we can extract a structure that we can then fill with the tags system to create other creatures or spaces of similar characteristics. Like that could be an interesting way to bridge the two methods through an already played example.
So yes to all of that. And the thing I didn't get to, which is that I'll just show this as a snapshot, that there are then books that were produced utilizing these methods that we started from. And what is interesting about them, if you do the same, like what's happening here, which is more than what's in there, that these sort of different description styles. So this particular book, which is Perlos Almanacs, which is for locations. So like here, the chosen method is like first giving details, like which is like actually fragmentary snapshots, extremely humid, insect hum, amphibian croaking. These are kind of like things that could be seeded in if you're in the location. Then there's discoveries, which are kind of more complex things, like a certain area which has tags, unsafe and neutral. And then there's questions. Why do locals from outside the marsh slum travel to the river and so on? But then there's other kinds of things, maybe to speed along. I'll show just this, which is the packaging of creatures or entities. Once again, tags, groups, organized construct. But then they have an instinct, which is to patrol until the end of time, but then skate at alarming speed, assemble in synchronized order, plow through them and knock them flying, which are a way to create this sort of description that is like related to an entity that has this activity. But that becomes then a way of description towards generation. Again, everything here is towards generation. And why I wanted to show this in relation to what you said, like this is pointing out how then this sort of way of expression becomes quite open. And it can be open in the sense that it's not just working towards defining, it's working towards generation. Like this is clearly like generatively useful to have for entities, these instincts, like movements. And for a place, these questions or these seeds of like, now we get like, you go to the river, but it's also extremely humid because the whole place is humid and there's still insect hum and so on. So yes, in a nutshell, there is this whole expressive range here, which can then also feed the oxel-like thing. And the whole navigation point being it's supporting different kinds of play. Like if we thought of what was there, what we generated, while in itself it was extremely fertile play, you can open the question of how you could bring some of the fertilities as seeds, just like something growing can create a fruit, into others' play. That there are many ways, and those ways don't have to like record, but they can also be generative sources in and of themselves. But overall, I think it can work, and I think in that case that we played, it's showing it already working in terms of supporting the situation structurally enough, but not too much, to take us elsewhere, to allow us to range from conventional relations to, say, artworks, to not just somewhere else, but then allowing a lot of freedom in how it's expressed to populate this unconventional exotic space that it creates, which then opens up this question of like how to produce seeds from that and offer them to others that they can also enrich themselves to other places. And then there is a practical infinity of these spaces, even starting from one sentence.
You always have so nicely quotable parts of what you say. Infinite. What? Now I just forgot about it. What did you say? Infinite.
Practical infinity.
Yeah, practical infinity.
Because I mean, if we took a little bit of different pathways, we would have traveled to very different artworks or senses or productions, and we could have continued those pathways that we had, like for whatever infinity itself. But we could have also extracted what we generated, the creature, and tried to describe that creature, but not in a sense that locking it down, but giving it to somebody else. All of these themes from this amphibian, threshold, mask, any direction. And then somebody could take just that creature and apply it to somewhere else. Or maybe travel paintings by finding this creature in other paintings. That's another pathway in the infinity. And there's something enginic about that. Like one sentence, Oxel traveling somewhere there, populating back, other people traveling to different directions, bringing something back, different editions of people packaging it as travel packages, really. But all of that, I think, works, or can work, and in terms of, like, as proven by this traveling itself.
I think I have to thank you that you stayed so much longer just because I was late. That you took the time.
Oh, this could have happened even if you haven't come late, but that does not imply that we're not happy to stay over time with you.
Yes, I think I'm quite happy that you came, and I think your contributions to the troubles were integral to it all. But I think that maybe is a good point to stop in the, let's say, in the middle of the meal, or there's more to be eaten, more to be gained from it. But I think it's at least proving what's the possibility of fertility and sustenance and nutrition that can be gained from here.
I propose to spend a bit more time on playing next time, just because I think it's the best, or it's the part where we gain most out of it. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, it's true. Like I'm maybe too enamored with like how to get there, and some of the parts of how to get there might be actually useful and important, but it's always the better to balance to actually kind of, you know, not just talk about the fruit, but go to the garden, so to speak. So yes, that's a question of balance. But with that, from the midst of the garden, I will stop the recording.